chapter 23. And I want to look at, just do a quick reading of the portions relevant to the upcoming Moedim appointed times. Go with me to Leviticus 23 and verse 23. Let's just read this together. I think it's good in preparation for the coming Moedim. Verse 23 of Leviticus 23 says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with blasting of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall do no ordinary work, and you shall present a food offering to the Lord." Verse 26, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Now on the 10th day of the 7th month is the Day of Atonement. It shall be for you a time of holy convocation, and you shall afflict yourselves and present a food offering to the Lord. And you shall not do any work on that very day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. For whoever is not afflicted on that very day shall be cut off from his people. And whoever does any work on that very day, that person I will destroy from among his people. You shall not do any work. It is a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall afflict yourselves. On the 9th day of the month, beginning at evening, from evening to evening, you shall keep your Sabbath." And verse 33, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, saying, On the 15th day of this 7th month, and for 7 days is the feast of booths to the Lord. On the first day shall be a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. For 7 days you shall present food offerings to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall hold a holy convocation, and present a food offering to the Lord. It is a solemn assembly. You shall not do any ordinary work. These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim as times of holy convocation, for presenting to the Lord food offerings, burnt offerings, and grain offerings, sacrifices, and drink offerings, each on its proper day. Besides the Lord's Sabbath, and besides your gift, besides all your vow offerings, and besides all your freewill offerings which you give to the Lord. On the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the produce of your land, you shall celebrate the feast of the Lord in 7 days. On the first day shall be a solemn rest, and on the 8th day shall be a solemn rest. And you shall take on the first day the fruit of splendid trees, branches of palm trees, and boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. You shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in the year. It is a statute forever throughout your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the people of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Thus Moses declared to the people of Israel the appointed feast of the Lord." So there we are. These are the upcoming Moedim that we have. Starting October 2nd will be Yom Teruah, the day of the blowing. We'll be meeting at Grace Place Church on 56th. I've sent out that address, so hopefully you have that. I'll be sending it out.
6202.
It's on
Tyler?
Tyler.
Yeah. 6202 South Tyler.
Yeah. Tacoma.
Yeah.
It's in Tacoma on Tyler Street, called Grace Place.
No, the older place because it's a pot house now.
Yeah. So we're going to be there for the night of October 2nd, which is the Yom Teruah. And then for those of you that want to, we'll be here. That's the night of October 2nd. For those of you that want to, that day, Yom Teruah, we'll be here for lunch from 10 to 2. Those of you that have the day off and would like to come here for lunch with us, we'll be here. We'll be looking at some scriptures, and so you're welcome for that. Then we come to the middle of the month of October, and we have Yom HaKippurim, and we'll be here for Yom HaKippurim, and then the next night for a Kol Nidre service here that night, and then the following day, that in the evening, we'll be here to break fast. So, and then we begin 5 days later the season of Sukkot for 8 days. I'm a little verklempt. That's a nice Yiddish term. I'm a little verklempt that this year Hanukkah will be coinciding, the beginning of Hanukkah will coincide with Christ Mass. Because every year inevitably I have individuals who say to me, so is Hanukkah the Jewish Christmas? And I have to say no, it has nothing to do with Christ Mass whatsoever. It has nothing historically to do with that at all. In fact, it moves around on the Gregorian calendar quite a bit. And this year it's going to be even more confusing for Gentiles because they're going to say, well, hold on, didn't Hanukkah start on Christmas? So it's got to be the same thing. And in fact, it's not the same thing at all. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, yes.
Just as on that note, because we think that Sukkot is probably the time when Yeshua was born,
Yes.
we've started Advent, started tomorrow.
Okay.
To start to lead up to maintain, because a lot of people miss that, the festival of the birth of Messiah.
Yes.
And that's understandable. So we've tried to move it toward to make it more of a festival and have the Advent and the songs and stuff leading up to Sukkot.
And during Sukkot, we have tried to accentuate the idea that this is the time period of Yeshua's birth and put that forward. So clearly we've tried to make that known. All right. So if you have a copy of the handout, you can read along with me just for a few moments. We're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 26 through 29. In verses 1 to 11 of chapter 26, the text opens with the command for every Israelite who harvests to bring the first fruit to the tabernacle and present it to the priest. Within these verses are two confessional declarations that each farmer is to recite at the tabernacle. The first declares that the land of Israel belongs to Israel because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh made a promise, that is a covenant, on oath, and Israel is about to enter the fulfillment of that promise. The content of the second confession recalls the exodus from Egypt. The phrase "by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm" are found in Egyptian literature with the Pharaoh as the referent. While in our text they speak of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. I note, so in other words, this is polemic language. When you see this language in the Exodus narratives, that he has an outstretched arm, a strong hand and an outstretched arm. If you look at Egyptian literature, you'll see the same kind of language, but it's talking about Pharaoh. So Israel picks up on this literature and says, it's not Pharaoh who has a strong hand and an outstretched arm, it's our God who does. And in fact, oftentimes in the scriptures, they will use this polemic, mocking nature of, they'll repeat things that others said, and turn it around and claim that it's got, for instance, in the Psalms. If you look at the Canaanite literature, it says that it's Baal who rides the clouds. That he's the one who rides the clouds, and he's pictured as riding on a bull on the clouds. And yet we find in the Psalms it says it's Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh who rides the clouds. Okay, so they're turning this around and saying it's not the one you think that's riding the clouds, it's our God who does.
Yeah, they just went on anyways, because really it is God who does all.
It is. So basically you see though that they're turning this language around on them and saying, it's not the one you think that does this, it's our God who does this. Okay, so I note that while we often speak of the plagues of Egypt, they're more often called the judgments. What God did to Egypt was not just some accident of nature or some quirk of fate, but rather the active judgment of God against the gods of Egypt. And I think it's important to stop here and say that behind these gods of Egypt, these Elohim, there are power. There is power. These are Elohim, which that is, there's demonic power behind them. So when we see the word gods, it is a demonic force that is propelling these and moving them forward. All right. In coming to the tabernacle, the Israelite was to bow down and worship to the Almighty. The word for bowing down is found only in one verbal stem in biblical Hebrew and has its own declension, ishtakaveh. If you look at, anybody does Hebrew grammar, this is one of those anomalies of Hebrew grammar, that this particular word has its own verbal stem. And it's the only verb in that stem. Of all the other verbal forms, you say, well, we could have nifal, ifil, all these other stems that we have in the verbal stems of Hebrew, and yet for this word for bowing down, it's its own verbal stem. It has its own, and it's the only word in that stem.
I know it's not a typo.
Could be a typo. Could be a typo. But it's the only one that if you look at all the grammars that they claim that this particular word, there's no other verbal forms that are placed into that stem. And we don't have any other words that seem to have the same vowel patterns, which is interesting. So the word for bowing down is found, I say, in only one biblical Hebrew, in its own declension. The physical act of bowing demonstrates a heart that desires to give God the honor and glory He alone deserves. In our text, the land of Israel is described as a land flowing with milk and honey. This phrase occurs in Deuteronomy 6. I give you all these references where it occurs, and numerous other places in the Hebrew Scripture. The milk spoken of was goat's milk, since neither Israel or the surrounding nations relied heavily on cow's milk. Honey was eaten as a delicacy and also used as a natural sweetener. There are two primary types of honey mentioned in the Bible. The first honey is the honey gathered from bees and gathered in the wild. The second type of honey is listed among agricultural products and refers to the syrup made from the nectar of dates, figs, and grapes. Okay. If you thicken them up, then you can have. So note that the scouts who spied out the land of Canaan came back with grapes, pomegranates, and figs to show that the land, quote, flowed with milk and honey. Okay. So an ancient text describing the land of Canaan states, it was a good land, figs were in it and grapes. It had more wine than water. Plentiful was its honey and abundant its olives. Every fruit was on its trees, barley was there, and so there's a lot of all these grains. Okay. So if you wanted to have, look at the diet of the ancient Near East, primarily grains, okay, a lot of grains. Bread was abundant. If you wanted to have cheese, you can age the goat's milk, and if you want to have yogurt, you can have the yogurt with the put your grain inside your goat's milk and let it thicken up. You have some yogurt. So dried fruit was a staple as well. When you don't have refrigeration, you let things dry. So you can have dried fruit.
Warm and dry land.
Yeah. So dried fruit and grains and goat's milk. Yeah.
I'm just curious, besides the goat's milk, what other proteins do you think because I know they didn't eat a whole lot of meat until sacrifice time.
Right.
You know.
So yeah, meat was more of a delicacy.
Yeah.
Something you would have on special occasions. It wasn't an everyday staple.
Right.
They didn't build a mill around meat like we do.
Right.
For protein, we know that they had what we would call nuts.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
so you have almonds, those type of.
Oh, those nuts.
So you have legumes. They would have had rice, which is not necessarily protein, but your
They had
legumes.
rice too. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what you're speaking of here? Grapes, pomegranates, and figs. A while back, in Israel 21, they did a study, several months study of pomegranate juice and how did it pitch flat out of their lips. And myself, having had 2 carotid artery surgeries, I've been drinking pomegranate juice ever since I read it. And it probably behooves all of us to do this.
Yeah, the pomegranate juice in Israel is absolutely delicious. They'll have different places set up where they have these hard press where you can the guy will slice a pomegranate right there in front of you, and then place it on the press, and then press the pomegranate juice for you, which takes out the seeds, but gives you the juice. I'm telling you, it's just absolutely delicious. And nothing like just fresh squeezed pomegranate juice. It's just delicious. So I do highly recommend pomegranate juice so this is one of the things you could drink. They have water. We know that they have wine and beer. And we know that because you have grains, and we found in ancient years in studies, we found residue of beer. So we know that they have water, pomegranate juice, milk from the goat, wine, and beer. So this would be the things that they would drink. Hold on a second, I gotta go back here. Yes.
So they have fish.
And they had
Oh,
fish.
I forgot about fish.
Now, you had fish from two sources. One would be the Galilee, Sea of Galilee. We find that in the apostolic text. And the other place you had fish from is if you lived on the Mediterranean coast. Okay. How far inland those fish reached is a little bit hard to know, but yeah, fish could be also salted and kept for a while, and you can dry it out, and it's nice to, you don't have to have refrigeration for it as well. And I saw, yeah, go ahead.
What's interesting, all these fruits are recommended on a Mediterranean diet.
Absolutely. So if you look at what they ate, very interesting. How God watched over them. Fish would be a source of protein. Legumes would be a source of protein.
Protein in the grains.
Protein in the grains as well. Some of it. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's what I was gonna bring up, the fish issue, because there was plenty, at least on the coastlands, plenty of fish.
Yeah, as you, in the Galilee,
That was very common.
yeah, in the Galilee you had abundance of fish. And even today, when you go at restaurants around the Sea of Galilee, it's nice because you have availability of fish there, St. Peter's fish and others. Yeah.
You listed there Emery. A
Yeah.
lot of people don't understand what that is. That's bearded wheat,
Yes.
which is very hard to husk. They're also very high in protein. Way higher in protein than wheat today.
Okay. Yeah. Another thing is, those of you that know the land of Israel know that as if you're thinking in terms of the map, on the upper part, Galilee, you have a huge area where they grow, even today, there are dozens of large wineries. And the grape industry and the wine industry in the Golan Heights, every time we go to Israel, we make sure to go to the Golan Heights winery. That's just one of them. But when we had Gershon Ferenczi here with us, he said, as far as growing grapes go, there is, if you look at the globe, there's a band that goes around the globe. And above that band or below that band, you don't get as great a quality grapes. That band runs through Italy, it runs through California, parts of Washington, but definitely through Israel and the Golan Heights. And so if you look at this band, the best wines are grown in those areas. And in the Golan Heights area, you have a huge amount of wineries and orchards. Some of the best wines in the world grown there. So we know that there was a huge wine consumption. And yeah, go ahead. One minute, I'll go back. Go ahead.
The interesting thing is that in the north end of Sea of Galilee, they used to grow huge quantities of rice because it's very, very shallow there. They don't do it today for some reason.
Right.
I don't know why it is.
No.
But around Tel Aviv, they drained the swamps when the Jews came back into the land. And one of the things they immediately started planting and growing there was rice.
Yeah. The big crop in northern Israel right now, it might surprise you that there's fields and they have they're covered by this visqueen, this thick visqueen plastic. Israel, bananas. The small bananas, the shorter bananas, they're all over the northern area right now, just covering acres and acres of there. So pomegranate, grapes, and the banana, yes.
You can get emmer wheat today. It's grown in the Meadow Valley, and it's called emmer farro. In the wintertime, we go to Sun Mountain Lodge to ski, and they serve that. That's their like wheat meal, and it's in like wheat berries, but it's amazing how that fills you up.
Wow.
So you can buy it like in a plastic thing. It's called emmer farro.
Okay.
Fabulous
Nice.
wheat.
Very cool.
And it would be interesting to see if people who had gluten intolerance, I bet could tolerate emmer farro. I don't know.
Okay.
It would be interesting to try.
Interesting. Should try that. Yeah.
So
protein.
The protein.
Yes,
So it had beans, right? Lentils.
and lentils. Yes.
Are there any other beans that are like indigenous to the area there?
Fava beans are in
Fava beans.
Yeah, fava beans.
Yeah, there are some other beans besides just lentils.
Actually, lima beans too.
I have a list of them. I can show you some books on this that kind of detail what you have grown in both in the Mediterranean and then in the land of Israel. So remember, we're talking about the area we're talking about would be Egypt, Israel, and then up into Mesopotamia. So that swath. Plenty of travel that's carrying things back and forth, caravans. So, like for instance, you see they're talking about onions. We know they had onions, garlics, things like that. So this is a whole huge topic of but I think if you look at their diet overall, and it's a healthy diet overall, for the most part.
The things that the Lord has provided for us are absolutely wonderful. We try to duplicate things with artificial means.
Yeah. Right.
We just
So
don't
wrong.
have berries. We have berries here in our country. Bumbleberry pie is a pie made with at least 5 different berries. One of these days, I'm going to try one with some ice cream.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Natural ice cream.
Yeah, but do we have any evidence of them, when they did do the sacrifices and had plentiful meat, do we have any evidence of it being dry, like a turkey?
I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know. I have to look into that.
Everything by the morning or something, didn't it be?
Well, certain
They'll only
like for
certain-
Passover, they're told to have it consumed by the morning.
Yeah.
So certain sacrifices were, part of it went to the priest, part of it to the people. So you can find each of those mentioned in both Leviticus and Numbers 28, 29. So it'd be a good question to look into. We check it out. I'll try. So we can
And
find.
were there people bringing sacrifices throughout the year
Yes.
to the temple anyway?
Yes. So it wasn't just on festivals. There were other times of year that people could bring things as well.
There are free will offerings, peace offerings and stuff.
Yeah, you could bring Thanksgiving offering, grain offerings. Mincha is a grain offering. We have wine offerings, which are libation offerings. So there were things throughout the year that you could bring as one wanted. All right, I'm going to skip down to so in verses 12 to 15. Here it is. Here's the interesting thing. The farmer is to bring 1/10 of his crop every third year. The 1/10 was to be divided among the Levites, widows, orphans, and the strangers within the borders. By bringing the produce to the tabernacle, the priest could distribute it to those in need. When this command is put alongside the other commands that provided for the disenfranchised, the Torah shows great concern for those without basic life necessities. In other words, you had to share some of your abundance. It was Torah required that you share some of what you have. If you have a parcel of land, whatever you have, part of that goes to those who don't have. You're always going to have a segment of the population, whether one likes it or doesn't, that is without food. So the Torah says, look, if you own a piece of land, who gave you that land to begin with? Well, God did. Who gives you the sunshine? God does. Who gives you the rain? God does. Who causes the increase? God does. You harvest it, but at the end of the day, all of it really goes back to being His. And in fact, here's how I'm going to show you that it's mine. Every 7th year, I want you to do nothing with it. And I'll bumper your crop in the 6th year. Okay? You're going to have to rely on me. So here's the thing. You leave the corners of the field for the poor and the widow and the orphan. You leave the corners of the field. Now here's the interesting thing. There is no discussion in the Torah as to how much you should leave, what that corner consists of. But you have to leave a corner. Now the rabbis come along and they tell you, well, you got to leave at least this much. Okay? At least a minimal, they give a minimal amount. If you're harvesting through your land, you harvest it one time. If you drop anything, it belongs to the poor, the widow, the homeless, the orphan. If you drop anything, it belongs to, if you pass by it, it belongs to, don't go back for it. And only go over it once. You can't do a second gleaning. Okay? And leave the corners. So that, and then there's a whole tribe. There's a whole tribe that you're supposed to make sure has everything they need, the Levites. Make sure that the Levites are taken care of. And throughout the times that it talks about the festivals, it says, don't forget the Levites. Don't forget the Levites. Okay? So, and all through the prophets, Israel as a nation is judged by how she treats widows, orphans, and the poor, the homeless, those who don't have. And now you can sit back and say, well, they, for whatever reason, they don't deserve to have whatever.
Not our call.
But that's not our call.
Amen.
Our call is not to judge whether they deserve food, clothing, and shelter or not. Our call is to give it to them out of our abundance and let God judge them. Now, that doesn't mean that they get everything else. They get the food, clothing, and shelter. They get those basic necessities of life. That doesn't mean you line their pockets with a boatload of money. That doesn't mean you give them, the Taj Mahal. That's not what I'm saying. But the basic necessities of life, food, clothing, and shelter, you don't judge them on. You say, God, you judge why they don't have those things. Now, we always have a segment of the population that has mental defect, that has physical defects, and are unable to work, and are unable to fend for themselves, so to speak. So, as a compassionate people, even a person who has a mental defect or a person who has a physical defect, they're still a creation of God. Still worthy of food, clothing, and shelter. And it's not for us to judge, do they deserve it or not? It's for us to say, you know what? Out of our abundance, and because God has blessed us and given us abundance, and everything we have comes from Him, we will give back to them the basic necessities of life. Necessities, not wants, not excess, but necessities.
It's because we have failed to do this that we have this monstrous bureaucracy in our country draining us of our tax dollars.
Absolutely, absolutely. When the people default on this, the government fills the vacuum. So this is what happens. If the people take care of these things, like we're supposed to, then you don't have the government filling the vacuum. It has no room. It's already being handled. And you don't have corruption as much. When the people handle it, then you don't have the corruption. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
How do you speak then of the Sadducee and their collection at the Holy Temple and using the great wealth of it to do tiles in their homes of gold?
Yeah, and I think that, look, there was clearly, by the time, prior to the first century, we know that there was corruption happening at the temple where things were not as they should be. There was fiscal abuse. Money is being taken in and used in ways it was never intended to be used. And instead, in fact, this starts with the prophets.
Yep.
You have the prophets castigating the people repeatedly for not taking care in Israel of the widows and the poor and the orphan and the homeless. I mean, it's all over the prophetic text. By the time we get to prior to the first century, the temple has become a part of the problem, where it's taking in literally boatloads of money and is not doing with it what they're supposed to.
Well,
This is why you see Yeshua having his problems with the temple. By the way, This is why you have, the Dead Sea Scroll community of Qumran. It looks like the initial group that goes out into the desert are former priests, Sadiq, and they're saying, we don't like what's going on at this temple. We can't stop it, so we will isolate ourselves. I think their solution, I think they had the right diagnosis, the wrong solution. So in other words, one of the things you can do is if you see a problem, you can isolate yourself and just say, you know what, all of those things are a problem, so I'm going to go over here and do my own thing. They did that. They went out to the desert, had a lot of writings, did their own thing, very isolationist, and the temple was still corrupt. It didn't stop it.
You didn't bring attention.
So it is. Well, let me come back to you. Hold on a second.
So I remember you told that about your friend who nobody wanted his wine, so he kind of just gave it away.
That was very shocking.
Yeah. So I was wondering, so in essence, if we have abundance and this and that, people won't come to our fields, if people don't, partake of what we want to give them. I know that a lot of, benefit organizations like churches and whatever have started to distribute, the funds. But the true responsibility, is it for us to do personally, or is it okay for us to give to other organizations to
Both. I don't think there's an either or per se. It's both. For instance, okay. Salvation Army. Case in point. Case in point. So the Salvation Army is, I didn't realize this until I met Don. The Salvation Army is a church. I mean, you're in one right now. I did not realize, I thought the Salvation Army was a bunch of bell ringers with the bells, the bell ringers with the red kettle. Okay? And you ring the bell and people come by and they drop a buck in or a quarter, whatever, okay. And this was the Salvation Army. And they had some stores where you could go and buy discount clothes.
True, we haven't seen guys in bands.
But the Salvation Army is a parachurch. Well, actually, it's a church. They want to be parachurch. So there's a church, our group of people in a community of faith, and you also have parachurch organizations. By parachurch, I mean they're not connected to a community of faith. Whereas here with the Salvation Army, there's actually a community of faith that meets here. Okay? So the Salvation Army wanted to be connected to communities of faith and to operate out of communities of faith. Because communities of faith have not done the things that we were supposed to on either an individual basis or a corporate basis, then you have parachurch organizations that rise up and say, we will fill the vacuum that's not being handled by the communities of faith. Okay? So to answer your question, on an individual basis, I think it's good to do some things. And on a corporate basis, where you pool your resources with others, for instance, so our congregation, we do a homeless breakfast every third Sunday. And our congregation purchases, or people from the congregation donate. So either people donate individually, or corporately, we provide some of the needs there. And this past Sunday, we did well over 300 people. Okay? Well over 300 people that come from off the streets. Now, here's the thing. We cannot solve all the problem by ourselves. But on the flip side of that coin, neither can we sit back and say, well, since we can't solve all of it, we'll do nothing. All we can do is what we can do where we are. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have more to do. We'll always have more to do. Okay? We always have more to do. But we have to try to do what we can. And seek for ways, both individually and corporately, to do more. I'm coming to you and come back more. Go ahead.
I just, ever since I was a little kid, I would always look at like large parks and, all the government land. And I always thought, why don't they plant like apple trees or have, lakes stocked with fish or whatever for the people who are homeless?
In fact, I'm working on, it's funny you say that, I'm working with an individual who I met regardless of all things, he and I are working at putting together there's some property in Puyallup that we're talking about where the pond will be stocked with fish, and we're working with another man who happens to be a scientist who does these, is helping us with how to make all that work. So that we will have, for low-income people or no-income people, we'll be able to have fish.
Well, I'm a plant biologist, so I'd like to work on that.
Okay. Yeah, so they're behind the scenes, we're doing some things. I'm trying to do some things I think will be helpful.
Yeah, I just always thought, why do like downtown areas have trees filled with like apples or whatever, so like people who are hungry can just like pick off the tree or do,
Yes,
Actually-
and you have community gardens. For instance, the Salvation Army here has a community garden.
Right.
And community gardens are growing up. Now, here's another thing. Here's another aspect of this. This is my own, do you realize, so this goes to your question. How many do you think exist? I'm gonna ask you a question here. How many of these do you think exist in this city? How many golf courses do you think exist in this city?
Oh, there's a bunch,
Gee.
How many do you think?
probably a dozen or so.
More?
More than 700?
No, more than 700, more than a dozen. My point is this.
There's more golf courses in our garden.
We love our golf.
No,
Because
you
it's,
love your golf.
I love my golf. Okay, I take that back.
People love their golf.
A lot of people love my golf. My point is this, we have the land
Right.
to do the right thing. We have the ability. What we lack
Is a desire.
is the desire, the initiative.
Golfing
Okay,
makes money.
so, for instance, in Puyallup, again, we have a tent city. Sometime I should take you guys there. It's a wooded area where they allow those who have no place to live to set up tents, literally in the woods. There's one also in the Kitsap Peninsula. And these are good-sized areas where people are allowed to set up tents. Because they have no other place they have a home. Okay. They're fascinating. And I'm working with groups that are we got to do something.
Absolutely.
So it is, most of us go home and we open a door, we go into four walls, and it doesn't even dawn on us. We have a full cupboard, we have a full fridge, and we have so much abundance, and we don't even think to ourselves, as we pillow our heads at night, that there are, for many, many people in our own communities around us, I'm not talking global here, I'm talking local, who have no place, no food, no shelter. Okay? And I'm not saying we have to solve all the problems, but neither can we desist from being a solution to part of the problem. We at least have to do a part. He doesn't ask us to solve the whole thing, but he does ask us to do our portion. That's the key. So I'm saying there's some things we could do. If we put our collective energies together and our collective minds together, we can do some things that will help. It may not solve all of it, but it's better than saying, I buried my head in the sand and did nothing. So I'm trying to be balanced to say, look, as I'm looking, if we're going to be truly Torah pursuant, we are never more Torah pursuant than when we help those who need help. Okay? And I'm not talking social gospel. That's not my point. We still have to reach out to these, because these are still human beings. We still have to, this is why when we went down to the homeless breakfast, I said one of the things we need to have music, that's God-fearing music. And we need to have the Gideons come in and pass out Bibles. And they love the music, and they love the Bibles. And we have to continue to find more ways to not just give them physical food, but also spiritual food. So that it's not an either or, that it's a both and.
They sing along.
But the person who has a need doesn't want to hear about how wonderful your God is when their stomach is rumbling.
That's right.
When you're saying, be warmed and filled, and I hope may the Lord be with you. And they're saying to themselves, well, you're going back to a nice house with a nice meal. That's very nice of you to be all God-fearing. What about sharing some of a little bit? And if everybody does a little bit, then a lot gets done. Hold on, I'm gonna come around. 1, 2, 3, hold on, go ahead.
In 10 years of renting a halfway house to men, the major problem was addictions. And in the spring, they would leave the halfway house. And this is a simple home that I've rented for almost 50 years, okay? But 10 men in that house. And they would leave in the spring when the weather got good enough so that what money they had, they would use for their addictions. They would come back in the fall when it started to freeze, okay? So why I'm saying that is there's some you can help on a daily basis. However, spiritually, some are a little far gone.
I agree. I'm not disagreeing whatsoever. Absolutely. I'll give you another example of how things can be done on a corporate level. Another example, and I'm coming back to you. During the winter months, churches in this area signed up to be places that when it got to a certain temperature, that the police could take people off the street for those churches. They would be open. And a buddy of mine, his church has opened up, the Salvation Army has opened up for that approach, so that why take these people to prison or to jail? It makes no sense. Okay? They're not criminals, they're on the streets. And it's cold. So what happens is we're seeing church buildings who said, hey, you know what, when it gets to a certain temperature, we're on the list. The police of Tacoma and other surrounding areas can bring people to our church. We'll have it open, we'll have coffee, we'll have basic foods there, and trying to have healthy foods, and there'll be cots with it. And so this room right across here where we eat was, in the wintertime, they put cots in there so that people could come in and come off the streets. And it became known that if you need to come in there, you can. So there are innovative ways that we can do a part. And I agree with you that there are hurdles and problems that have to be worked through. And you're right that some people, it's difficult to minister to. Absolutely. Go ahead.
It's scriptural, Brent, that you're talking about. It goes back to the parable of the talents. We can't do everything, like you said, but as God has given us talent, we should use them. We'll bring back a great many, and we'll bring back a few. For heaven's sake, don't bury it.
Right. And I just want to say, since I'm in the Salvation Army, they are doing the most good. Okay? So I always call Don and say, Don, I just want you to know, I'm doing good, but you're doing the most good. You know? So, but you know what? I gotta tell you, most of us don't realize the long reach of things that the Salvation Army does to help this community. Another thing that they're planning, and I don't know, can I tell this?
Sure.
Okay. They're planning to build on the 6th Avenue area where they have properties. They're planning to build a high-rise, low-income apartments. Okay, so the people who don't have a place to stay. There's low-income, there'll be a low-income apartments. It's going to be a high-rise apartment building on the 6th Avenue property. So there are things happening, good things happening that I want to be a part of. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the school where I work, we have something called the backpack brigade, and we give kids a backpack with food so they can get through the weekend. Because a lot of them have, no place to live, and we also provide transportation from the school and everything. But I also want to say that, everybody has a story. Everybody has an experience. I remember being in New York City and looking at this fellow who was obviously a homeless person for like a super long time. And the man was elderly, and he was so filthy, you couldn't sometimes tell the difference whether he had his clothes on or not. And these police officers were making him get off of this bench. And I just felt so, sad because he barely put his pants back on. And I'm thinking, who knows this person? Where is his family? Do they know he's in this situation? Does anyone care for him? And it was just really like, God, help me pray and help me remember this person. But how many people are like that out there? That, let's not, assume anything. Let's just really
Right.
just help them first, and then we can find out what's
Right. So I'll give you an example of speaking of story. So as most of you know, Corey helps with, heads up the homeless breakfast. And so his oldest son has mental illness. I'm not telling you anything that most of you don't already know, I think. And there was a couple years that Corey and Mary didn't know where he was. They didn't know where he was. So Corey said to me one time, he said, I look at it this way. The people we help downtown, maybe if I pay it forward with helping somebody else's son, somebody will help my son. Because I don't even know where he is. For a couple of years, imagine when you don't even know where your kid is. As a parent, you can't even think. Like your parent, you have a child in the Philippines, but you know where they are. Even though they're far away from you, you know where they are. Okay? You imagine as a parent thinking to yourself, I don't even have a clue where my kids are. Not even a clue. As a parent, your mind, I can't even go there. And that's where they were. And so his attitude was, you know what? I hope somebody will be compassionate and kind to my child who doesn't know them, and will have compassion on them. I'll have compassion on somebody else's children, because these are still somebody else's child, somebody else's son, somebody else's daughter. These are human beings, and they have to be given some type of dignity.
Yeah.
And so, so Corey says, no, one of the reasons I do this is because I see these people come off the streets, and I see where that they're basically my son. And whose fault is it? As if there's a fault that there's mental illness. It's not a person's fault necessarily. Now, some of it can be, but for the most part, and again, why judge? At that point, let's help. Okay, go ahead.
It's, what you're saying too is if you're open to the Holy Spirit, open to what's out there. Because at work, we do a chili cook-off competition, and what we're doing is raising money for a Head Start out at Shalishan, 2 classes. It started with 1 class, now it's 2 classes, for boots. The little Head Start class can't go on field trips, but they can go on walkabouts. But these kids have 1 pair of shoes, tennis shoes. So they get a pair of boots that stay in the classroom all year, take them home at the end of the year. And from that too, we have a Christmas family fund that we do raffles and such at one time a year at Christmas time. And those Head Start teachers know who's not going to get Christmas. And so they are able to do that. So it's being open.
Absolutely.
And,
Aware and open.
Aware and open, and say, you know what?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many, is that at least you're doing something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll go to the top of page 2. I want to do the first 3 paragraphs here. In verses 1 to 8 of chapter 27, the Israelites are commanded to build standing stones on which the whole of the Torah is to be inscribed. These stones are to be covered over with plaster, probably for the purpose of preserving the rock against natural elements. Plastered inscriptions have been found at Hutalah Ashrud and Dair Allah with a Semitic language on them. By placing these stones on the land of Canaan, the Israelites were declaring that this land was now going to be governed by Torah. The next thing that must be built upon crossing the Jordan is the making of an altar. This altar must not be touched by brass tools and must be made of unhewn stones. No weapons of war. What is not made clear in this text is whether the Torah is supposed to be written on the altar or if the standing stones were to be placed near the altar. We could debate that, not a word. The rest of chapter 27 and 28 are taken up with blessings and curses. Blessings are for those obedient to Torah, and curses for those who are disobedient. After each of the blessings and cursings, the phrase, and all the people said Amen, is spoken by the audience. This phrase reminds us that there is a corporate responsibility that we have to one another. As we have seen before, one Israelite can undermine the progress of the rest. Our Western mindset says that when I sin, I only affect myself. But the Torah teaches that sin in one can have an ill effect on all. There's a residual effect at times of sin. That in a community or in a culture, it has an effect. I go back to Corey for just a moment. He works at Discovery High School in Port Orchard, and he made the comment to me one time. He says, sometimes, so Discovery High School is an alternative high school. There's a number of these alternative high schools, which is a nice way of saying, for whatever reason, these kids do not make it in the traditional high school. Okay? So these kids have difficulties. There's a lot of issues. And he says you meet the parents and you realize why they have issues.
Yes, absolutely.
You meet the parents and you go, it's amazing and a miracle that you're even sane after meeting these parents of these kids. You're like, you should not have, he's thinking, you should not have had kids.
It's true.
Because all you've been is a biological donor. You've not been a parent.
Same in elementary school.
Same thing in elementary. I'm sure every teacher sees it. Where you go, wow, the nut did not fall far from the tree. It's no wonder these kids are messed up when you look at their parents and go, wow, of course they're messed up. So what I'm saying is that sometimes the reason we have problems with sin and the reason things happen, you can see it at that level where it perpetuates. And one ungodly act leads to more ungodliness and more paganism. Because this is where the parents perpetuate it into their children. And kids grow up in atmospheres and in homes where there is no righteousness. In fact, it's right the opposite, it's ungodliness. And then is it any wonder that they're ungodly and that they raise their kids to be ungodly? So yes, there is residual that comes from, now that can happen on the good side as well, where righteous parents and righteous grandparents can raise righteous children. So it can happen on the other side as well. But make no mistake that there is an effect when there is sin. It has ill effects that are often difficult to overcome. Very difficult to overcome at times.
I just wanted to say there's been some times where I've known some parents and their kids have gone to an alternate kind of a high school or junior high or whatever. And it was just partway because of their children where they were at.
Oh, absolutely.
They were
Absolutely.
saying, just sounded like you were
No,
categorizing everybody.
No, I'm not. I think that there's many that don't have any issues, but there's certainly some that do. So, yeah, no, not everybody. No, I'm not throwing everybody in the same pool, but I am saying that there's clearly a significant number. So, third paragraph, I want to end with this. The following are a list of things for which one can be accursed. 1, the making of sculptured or molten images, especially for the purpose of worship. 2, insulting either father or mother. The word for insult is the Hebrew word machlah, which is related to the word cow, and thus means to treat as light or to make light of. 3, the moving of boundary markers. This is another form of stealing popular amongst landowners. In other words, you can just kind of move your boundary marker a little bit closer to, further out, and all of a sudden, you own more property. What do you know? You gain another 10 feet. Because that guy doesn't remember where the boundary marker was before. That's how they did things before you had fences. Number 4, taking advantage. Now look at this, taking advantage of those who are blind. Using someone's handicap to make sport or profiting off the handicap is prohibited. You can't profit off those who are handicapped or make sport of them. Just prohibited. It's a Torah prohibition. Number 5, one who does not help the widow, the fatherless, or the stranger. Number 6, all sexual activity within the family, including a clause of bestiality. By the way, the more you think the Torah is irrelevant, the more it's relevant. The more it's relevant. Number 7, one who assaults another Israelite. And number 8, one who accepts a bribe perverting justice.
Well, there goes Supreme Court.
So,
Easy.
Well, that, no.
Regardless of how right you are.
but I mean, look at what the Torah is. Look at how pervasive and how clear it is on things that undermine righteousness. It's just.
Is that why they want to take the 10 Commandments out of the justice system and all the courthouses and everything, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for that. I want to read this. At the very bottom of the last page, this is kind of my thinking, and I will, I said to put it this way, work the line that we get, but to put it this way, the foundation of our calling, look at this, the foundation of our calling is personal character. The nature of our calling is service. The motive of our calling is love. The measure of our calling is sacrifice. The authority of our calling is submission. The purpose of our calling is to glorify God. The tools of our calling are Torah and prayer. The privilege of our calling is growth. The power of our calling is the Ruach, and the model of our calling is Yeshua the Messiah. Just read through that later on. Okay, that's how I think in terms of ministry and what we do. The privilege is growth, not the goal. The privilege. Okay. The power of the calling. When I say the Ruach, I mean the Holy Spirit. So that's the power. It has to be the power behind our calling. But if our Torah, if our following of Torah is not pragmatic enough to reach people who have needs, then we are missing the boat. If it becomes about keeping a commandment for head knowledge, then we have lost our way. We must always stay in the text with our heads. We must never abandon study, but we must never let study become the only thing we do. And we must never let just the keeping of a commandment for the sake of keeping a commandment to be the point. He calls us, and what we've been talking about in the big picture is, if I were to sum it up, is love your neighbor as yourself. Because, to put it in another way, if you were homeless, if you were without food, if you had nothing, what would you want from others? And what you would want is, you would want some food, you would want some clothing, and you would want some shelter. If you were on the other side of the aisle, you would at least want the basics. So love your neighbor as yourself. And if in this Torah movement we become simply academic and we become philosophical and we forget that we have a job to do, then we have lost our way. We have incredibly lost our way. I want to keep my feet on the ground. I want to keep my feet planted here. And I have many brothers and sisters, and look, I'm all for studying, and I do study. the apocalyptic stuff. But the apocalyptic stuff doesn't feed the homeless. I study end time stuff. I think it's great. I love it.
It's not salvation.
Yeah. But I've also got to help those in need. So we have to do both. We have to find that balance. I don't want to be so head in the clouds academically that I lose touch with the reality around me.
If you've done it the least of my brethren,
You've done it the least to me. You know, where did you give? Where did I see you hungry and feed you? Where did I see you thirsty and give you drink? Where did I see you in prison and visit you? You know, you did it unto one of the least of these, you did it unto me. So we have to see it as something we do unto the Lord. If necessary, remove the face of the person you're, and just see that, you know what, this is about helping him. This is about ministering to him, because they are created in his image. They are just as much as image bearers as we are, no matter what their condition. No matter what the condition of the flesh, there's still someone who is capable of being redeemed. They have an eternal destiny. So we must not just become, in our Torah observance and our Torah pursuance, so academic and so jot and tittle that we lose connection with the reality around us. That outside these walls, there are those who need help. And that we have what they need, or at least we can be a part of that solution. Maybe not all of it. I'm not saying that we throw ourselves completely into this, but I'm saying that we, at least a portion of what we have is involved in this. At least a portion. You have to leave the corners of your field. You have to leave at least the corners. I mean, that's just not doing anything. In not harvesting that, you're leaving it for them. So there are some things you could do just by taking your hands on it. So there's some things that are active and some things that are passive that one can do or not do. But we can't do nothing.
But the one thing is, even though we leave the corners, we don't dig stuff there, people gotta have the energy and get up and go get it. And nowadays, I feel in today's society, our culture is so dependent upon other people that they don't look at themselves, they have to do something.
Yeah.
They have to act.
Yeah, and I think, I liked she mentioned earlier Gershon, and here's an example of this. This was from Gershon Ferenczi, who has been with us, and I go see him every time I'm in Israel. He has the winery, and she mentioned that in Israel, he told everybody, he told people, come and gather from my corners of my vineyard. And everybody looked at him like he was crazy. Nobody does that. Nobody's been good at that. You're nuts. Nobody believed him. So the next year, he went out and bottled up what the equivalent of the corners was, put it in, had it bottled up and corked, and went out and actually stood out on the streets and passed out bottles of wine. And he said, his comment was this: if they won't come to my corners, I'll take my corners to them. So I think in some ways, we have to take the corners to them.
Yes.
They may not always come to the corners because of multiple reasons. Some decent, some not so decent.
So why don't we transport people to the corners?
Say it again?
Why don't we transport the people to the corners if they won't come to the corners?
Okay, you can do that too. Maybe a little bit of both. Maybe a little bit of both. Either or both and. Either way,
You just gotta do something.
you gotta do something.
Yeah.
We
go to like Winco or some store, pick up a couple of cases of like raviolis, a couple of cases of fruit with pop tops, you know, and fork and napkin, put it in a plastic bag, 1 gallon bag, and keep it in the car. You know, you come up to the corner, somebody's sitting there,
That's
pass
cool.
it on, you know.
Absolutely.
There's not money, but it's something to help them survive.
It's food.
You know, it's
Yeah.
food.
Yeah, you know, one of the restaurants that I like to attend in this area, they have every year they have a drive. One of the things that people on the street that keeps is peanut butter. Okay? And it's better than starving. It's protein, and you can all you need is a little knife to you know, you don't have to have a lot of stuff to prepare it. I mean, it's, you open up a can of peanut butter. You know, so they do a peanut butter drive. For people living on the streets, peanut butter is huge. It's great because you can just open it up. You don't have to refrigerate it. You don't freeze it, you don't refrigerate it. It's just, you can put the lid back on, you're good to go. Okay? Simple. Yes.
Once in a while I get coupons from grandparents, get a free burger and go buy one, get a free.
Sure.
Just close this homeless person I see, here you go, burger.
I think there's innovative ways. There are innovative ways that we can do things that will help. And, you know, like I said, I think it's cool that we're here because I think we are in a place, and by that I mean the Salvation Army, that is demonstrating to us ways in which that can happen. There are ways that you can do things to help your culture and your society around you. And they're doing a lot of it. And we can see and educate ourselves on how others are doing it. All right.